All right, guys, it looks like we are live, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today on Standing for Truth. On Standing for Truth, we focus on the truth of biblical creation. And today we have an awesome guest with us. I am extremely excited that Michael J. Oard can be with us today for this incredibly important presentation and topic. Mike has done a great deal of amazing work on creation and the global flood of Noah. And he is best known for his work on the biblical ice age, which is exactly what we are going to be discussing here today, is the ice age. So I want to thank everybody in the audience. Please also tag me with your questions at Standing for Truth. That way I will see your questions. Typically our chats get lively, and today is definitely going to be a good show. So I am going to bring in Mike Oard and our award-winning co-host, George Bond. Thanks so much. Gentlemen, Mike, once again, it's so great to have you here.
Hi, you're welcome.
Well, I want to say, again, thanks for giving us your time for today's important show. And we have a lot of new viewers and subscribers since your previous presentation with us on the global flood and the recessive stage of the flood. If you wanted to take a few moments to give everybody a brief introduction as to who you are, maybe what you're doing in terms of creation research, and why you find this topic so important, Mike.
Well, we have a huge amount of challenges out there, not only from the secular world, the university, and even from our neighbors and friends on how do you explain this? How do you explain that? And so I deal with the questions on the flood, and there's a huge amount of questions of the flood. By the way, bringing the flood back to Earth history solves many of them. Now, some of them are unsolved, mainly because we don't have the data for a lot of them or the time to do it. But it excites me that we do have answers. And if a person is willing to be patient and check us out and see what we say about certain things, they would be most impressed. We have over 50 years of creation research that we've done, like the Creation Research Society Quarterly, Journal of Creation Answers Research Journal. So we have answers, and I'm just happy to be part of that. And so it excites me to do this. And there's a lot to do, as I'm sure a lot of people know.
Amen. Amen. Great introduction, Mike. And I want to recommend your previous presentation and audience Q&A with us to everybody in the chat. Anybody who's new to this channel, please check that out. I do have it in the description box of this video, as well as some links directly to some articles that you can find from Mike on the creation.com website. So we've also got George here with us. Thank you so much, George. A few introductory words from yourself.
Good morning. Actually, very early in the morning. By the way, SFT, I go to my mailbox every morning looking for that award. I still haven't got it. So, good morning.
I'm going to travel
morning,
to Australia and deliver it to you personally.
Yeah. Can I start the proceedings by saying it's a pleasure to have you here again, Mike. For those that haven't really had the pleasure, we had Mike around 6 to 8 weeks ago regarding the receding floodwaters. I urge those that haven't watched it to do so. It's in our playlist. For anyone who hasn't read much creationist material, you'll find Michael's volumes, and I mean volumes of papers and articles, is written on many creationist websites. His wealth of information and work is cited by many other creationists also. I believe, Mike, last time we spoke, you said you had a list of over 500 projects that you would love to complete. So I guess in your case, it's a work in progress, Mike.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have about 15 projects going, but I keep saying I have 500 years worth of research left to go.
Well, Mike, true to my form, I always start off with a bit of a joke. You'll be happy to know that some scientists from Berkeley were successful in getting a grant in order to determine the height of a flagpole. So they looked and looked at the pole. They had their toolbox and their measuring tapes and everything, and they couldn't figure out how we're going to do this. We don't have a ladder that long. So a woman walked by and asked, what were you doing? What are you trying to do? We're supposed to find the height of this flagpole, said one of them, but we don't have a ladder long enough. Oh, well, the woman looked at the spanner and a tape measure from their toolbox. She began to loosen a couple of bolts at the base of the flagpole and laid it down on the ground, took the measurement and announced 6.5 meters and walked away. One scientist shook his head and laughed. He said, a lot of good that does us. We ask for the height and she gives us the length.
Yeah.
All right.
Very good.
Mike, back to seriously now. Having watched your video on the Ice Age twice now, I'll admit, I have to express my ignorance before having seen it. I was not aware of a lot of what you stated in that video, but rather than steal your thunder, I'll wait till your presentation. For those that are listening, of particular interest was how the mammoths and other mammals got to the far north, and the freezing of the mammoth's stomach contents and how they preserved in the permafrost. My research shows that as far north as Greenland, there is abundant evidence of moderate climate just 700 to 800 years ago. Now, Creation Research, our friend John McKay and Joseph Hubbard, have a documentary on this called Fire and Ice. For those wanting to check that out and see what evidence I'm actually talking about, you can find that in that documentary. However, I'm sure our audience are here to hear from you, Mike, and watch you rather than me. So I'll let you take it away.
The floor is yours, Mike. We can get right into the presentation if you'd like to, and I can share your screen as well.
Okay.
Thank you for that introduction, George, as well, and a good joke to start us off with. I appreciate it. And here we go, Mike. I've got your screen pulled up.
Can you all see it?
Yep.
Yes. Looks good. Looks good, Mike.
Okay. This is my standard talk on the Ice Age. And the title is an Ice Age, only the Bible can explain it. Very provocative subtitle there, but I will explain it as I go. Anyway, there's hundreds of earth science challenges. And here's a list I just wrote down over a 5-minute period. Some of these I've worked on. Here's more of them. Anyway, the Ice Age is one of these challenges that the secular scientists give us. So this is going to be about the Ice Age. And through the Ice Age model, biblical model, we can answer some of these other ones that I've listed here. The results of these challenges, there's hundreds of them. I read about them all the time in the secular literature. They cause many to doubt God's word. And they cause tens of thousands of atheists and agnostics. Some of the people think these challenges are so solid that the Bible can't explain it. It's caused tens of millions of Christians to fit evolution and deep time into the Bible as a result. It's enhanced the local flood myth. It's resulted in a mass exodus of youth. So these challenges are important for us to answer. And this is what I spent 45 years doing. A closer look at challenges. Many do not realize that most of these are also challenges to evolutionary geology. When I research a topic, I find out that a lot of times when you dig below the surface that it's challenging to them. They can't explain it. In fact, there's numerous challenges to deep time and uniformitarianism. Also, we have to realize that we're not going to solve all challenges. And one of the reasons is because there's not enough known in the sciences. So we got to be patient with challenges and check into them and do research. And many really do not know that the creation flood ice age model has solutions to many of these challenges already. Some challenges take a long effort, long time. So it's not going to be done overnight. We have a lack of workers and funds. So those are some of the reasons why we have some unanswered challenges. Anyway, let's talk about the ice age. First of all, what is an ice age? Well, you can't really find much of a definition except that it's a great increase in snow and ice. Currently, 10% of our continents have ice on them now, mainly Greenland and Antarctica. During the ice age, 30% of the land surface was covered by ice, mainly in the high latitudes and locally down to the mid latitudes and in many mountainous areas. Also, was the last major event in Earth history. Last major event. And I'm going to come back and revisit that at the end. Okay, actually, there are 5 ice age periods according to the secular uniformitarian. There's the Pleistocene, less than 2.6 million years. The late Paleozoic, about 280 million. The late Ordovician, 450 million. Late Precambrian, several of them during that time period. Some of them supposedly are global glaciations, which brings up an interesting conundrum: is how do you glaciate the globe? And not only that, how do you melt it? Big problems. I've dealt with these before. And also there's mid-Precambrian glaciation. So there are generally 5 major ice age periods. There's some minor ones in between. Anyway, it's the Pleistocene is the real ice age. And they claim there's 50 ice ages now in the Pleistocene, but it's mainly their last that is the one that's correlated to the biblical ice age. The reason for the other many is due to deep sea cores, wiggles in deep sea cores. You don't see that evidence on land. Anyway, the Pleistocene ice age is real, but only the last is equal to the post-flood ice age. The other 4 can be explained by gigantic submarine landslides during the flood, because they're from the flood. And I wrote a book about this quite a while ago, documenting this: ancient ice ages or gigantic submarine landslides. Anyway, here's the challenge of the ice age that they give us. Each ice age takes 100,000 years, at least in the last million years. Before that, it was every 40,000 years, they claim. The glacial phase is approximately 90,000 years, and the interglacial phase is 10,000. Now, we live in an interglacial phase right now called the Holocene. And there's been, like I said, about 50 regular repeating ice ages during the past 2.6 million years of various intensities. That's what they claim now. And that's the challenge that they give us. And here's a quote from the anti-creationist Arthur Strahler. He says, increasing the duration of the ice age by a factor of about 10 greatly increases the stress upon the creation scientists, who must compress the events of 15 million years into 4,000 years of post-flood time. Well, this guy's got a huge book with challenges for us, and he did a lot of research. So he looked into our stuff, and so he got some things right, like the post-flood time, and other things he's got wrong. So what's this increasing the time by 10? Well, they decided because of other geological phenomena, mainly ice-rafted debris in deep sea cores, dated as Oligocene or Eocene, early Cenozoic, Paleogene for other people. And therefore they decided that, well, these came from Antarctica. Antarctica must be 10 times the age we thought it was. So overnight it becomes 10 times the age, where it started about 40 million years ago, and the Eocene reached a maximum at 15 million years. So that's the challenge it gives us. We need to not only explain the ice age, but also the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets, and that they say takes 10 times as more time. What do we do with challenges? This is my theme verse for all research. In fact, it's a great theme verse for life. Examine everything carefully. Hold fast to that which is good. 1 Thessalonians 5:21 from the NASB. I can't emphasize more of that word carefully. You got to go beyond the superficial. See, you can go on online and see a lot of challenges they give us, like I saw one the other day on the Ice Age. So, and it sounds kind of convincing, but when you look at it carefully and bring back the Bible into Earth history, you know, there's a whole different way of looking at it, a whole different explanation. And so this is my theme verse for research. I examine everything carefully. So I need to kind of back up and kind of, first of all, answer a few questions. Was there really an ice age? See, there are some people, even a few creationists, that don't believe there was an ice age. Well, where are you going to test to find out whether there's an ice age? Well, you go to places that are glaciated currently and look and see what glaciers produce on the land. And then you see if these similar features are found elsewhere. And of course, here's the beautiful Athabasca Glacier in the Canadian Rockies. And it was out here in 1890. Practically all the glaciers in the world have shrunk due to a little global warming. I emphasize a little global warming. But what you see glaciers do, they produce these ridges and mounds of all kinds of rocks. Like here's one right here in front of it, a ridge of debris that was left. That's called a end moraine or terminal moraine. And along the edges, you find where the debris has been piled up along the side as the glacier advances. They're called lateral moraines. And here is a picture of the lateral moraine to the north. You see, it's got some good sized boulders in it. It's just a pile of rocks, various sizes, all mixed up. By the way, I was young and stupid when I took this photo. I actually went up on this ice, this Columbia ice fields, Athabasca Glacier. Had a lot of crevasses. I was pretty dumb, but I survived. And then you find scratched boulders. The boulders are scratched because they, at the bottom of the glacier, as it moves, the boulders scratch the bedrock and the boulders get scratched. And sometimes the boulders will shift because the ice is plastic, can shift, and it can form scratches on the boulders in different directions. Like here, there's two directions, right in here and right in here. So that's typical. And then the bedrock is scratched in the direction that it moves. These are typical of glaciated areas today. Do we see these areas in places that are claimed to be glaciated? Indeed, we do. This is west of where I used to live in Great Falls, Montana. I live now in Bozeman, Montana, about 150 miles south. And here's the Rocky Mountain front in the background. And in the foreground, you see this mound of, and you see boulders at the top. And it continues over here. You can see it's just a mound of debris of actually rocks of all sizes. It was continuous in here at one time, but it probably broke through here because of it dammed up a glacial lake and cut through here. And of course, that's where they put the reservoir. And when you look at the close-up of the terminal moraine, you see rocks of all sizes in a jumbled mixture, just exactly what you expect for glaciated areas. And then you find some scratched rocks in that terminal moraine. And when you hike up to the top of the Rocky Mountain front, this is the first cliff in the Rocky Mountain front. It's 800 feet high, about 250 meters high. And yet you see the scratched bedrock moving from west to east and down into the high plains about 20 miles east to where it ended. So this area was glaciated, but this area in the summertime gets up into the 80s or in centigrade, 20 to 30 degrees centigrade for high temperatures. And so no glacier is going to survive in the Rocky Mountains or in the plains today. Very, very far from producing any glaciers. And then you find that a lot of the mountainous areas in the western United States were glaciated, and glaciers came out of the mountain valleys onto plains. Like here's one at Enterprise, Oregon, Northeast Oregon. And you see this horseshoe-shaped feature right in here with a dammed up, overdeepened lake like a fjord. And when you this feature would not form in the flood, as some people have tried to tell me. Anyway, this is a special shape from a glacier coming out onto a valley and piling up a lateral and a terminal moraine, like you see in presently glaciated area. And when you look from the lake level at the lateral moraine, you can see the trees for scale. This lateral moraine is 600 feet tall. When you look at what's in the lateral moraine, you see it's rocks of all sizes and generally a finer grain matrix. Like here's a granite rock right in here, a lot of granite in those mountains. So this area was glaciated. Enterprise, Oregon, Northeast Oregon gets up in the low 90s for high temperatures in the summertime. You couldn't glaciate the Wallowa Mountains today. It's very far from creating an ice cap there. And then you find all these erratic boulders. Here's a famous train of erratic boulders that stretch 600 kilometers from near Jasper, Alberta, Canada to Cutbank, Montana. This is a quartzite. Look how angular that is. By the way, this is John Wood Merapi for scale. This is southwest of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. It couldn't have rolled down in the flood. It had to be transported in an iceberg and deposited. And this probably was a glacial river between the Laurentide ice sheet in central and eastern Canada and the adjacent United States, and to the west, the Cordilleran ice sheet that covered the Rocky Mountains and moved down off the Rocky Mountain front for maybe about 50 kilometers. And here's a really interesting boulder. This is about 180-ton argillite boulder. So you can see it's a shale. Argillite is a slightly metamorphic shale. It's in the Willamette Valley, southwest of Portland, Oregon. It's about 200 kilometers south of the furthest southern extent of the Cordilleran ice sheet, which is Olympia, Washington. And by the way, this type of rock does not outcrop anywhere in the state of Oregon. And you couldn't have rolled this. By the way, it outcrops in northern Idaho and western Montana, near where I live. And this part of the Belt Supergroup rock from the Belt Basin, 20 kilometers plus of sediment in a deep hole deposited. Anyway, the glaciers, it's deposited down here. What's it doing down here? And it's angular. Well, the only explanation is the Lake Missoula flood, where the valleys of western Montana ponded to 600 meters by an ice dam in northern Idaho. And then it broke through that ice dam and flooded eastern Washington and carved it up, moving 80 miles an hour through there, and moved through the Willamette Gorge and spread out in the Vancouver, Portland area, with all kinds of erratic boulders spread over the Willamette Basin, which is what you're seeing here. And this unique one had to be carried by an iceberg from as far away as western Montana, which indicates that if you had a Lake Missoula flood and you had an ice sheet that was at least 2,500 feet thick in northern Idaho, you had an ice age. And here's a quick summary of the Lake Missoula flood. Here's the valleys of western Montana. I lived down about in here, and it filled it up 2,000 feet deep right there. And it carved through that ice into glacial Lake Columbia, and then it carved up eastern Washington. 50 cubic miles of basalt and silt was eroded. The green areas where the channel flowed. And here it is from space. You can see the path of the floodwater, the Lake Missoula flood. It was 10 times the combined flow of all the rivers in the world. Huge. They rejected it for 40 years because it was too biblical in scale, until they realized that there's hundreds of pieces of evidence for this. And so when you add up all these areas where it shows glaciation, this is the general area of where it was glaciated, generally down into the mid-latitudes of the United States and the mountains of the west. This is a schematic. It's not meant to be accurate. And here's an area not glaciated somehow, right in the within about 300 kilometers north of its furthest extent. And here's Alaska. Only the mountains of Alaska were glaciated, but the lowlands were not. Major mystery of science, which I will say something about towards the end. That's where you find the woolly mammoth fossils, the horses and the bisons in the lowlands of Alaska. And then the same thing in Eurasia. There's the general location of the ice. It's rather controversial how much ice was here, by the way. By the way, this is an old schematic from one of my books from the 90s. So that's questionable how much ice was here. And now they believe the Barents Sea north of Norway was glaciated. And some more mountains besides the Alps were glaciated here. It's just a schematic. The central mountains of Asia, the mountains of Siberia, only the mountains, but not the lowlands. And that's where you find the woolly mammoth fossils by the millions, especially in the New Siberian Islands here and in the adjacent coastal area in the permafrost. So this is the general location of the ice. 30% of the land surface was covered by ice during the Ice Age. So there was an Ice Age. Can mainstream sciences explain the Ice Age? Remember, I said that they are always challenging us, but I find that they're challenged also. But in order to know whether they're challenged or not, we need to know what it takes for an Ice Age. What do we need? Here's the requirements for an Ice Age. Cooler summers. Winters are already cold enough most areas. In fact, most areas would benefit for a warmer winter because the warmer the air, the more moisture it holds. So you can produce more snow. Then secondly, greater snowfall. You need much more snowfall. And it has to not melt during the summer. So it builds up year by year. So it persists for many years. You just can't have a climate change for 1 year. By the way, how much cooling are we talking about? What kind of numbers? Well, a man did a computer study of to see where the 1 inch line or more snow areas occurred after the summer melt in Canada. And he cooled off the average summer temperatures of Canada by increments of 2 degrees centigrade, about 3 degrees Fahrenheit. So when he cooled it off to 12 degrees centigrade, his 1 inch line was in northern Canada, there and northward. That's where his 1 inch line, cooling off 12 degrees centigrade in the summer. That's about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's where his 1 inch line was left after the summer melting, and supposedly would increase with many more years. And that's where your ice sheet would start. But the thing is, the ice went clear south of the Great Lakes into the mid-latitude. So you need a lot more cooling to get it down that far. And by the way, the glaciers didn't develop in northern Canada and move at a glacial pace down to the northern United States. In general, they form more or less in place. There was a soft movement because the slope, they moved by the surface slope mainly, and so the surface slope was always be to the south, so you'd have scratched bedrock down towards the south. So it generally formed more or less in place. So let's try Minneapolis, Minnesota. This would work for many places along the edges in northern United States. The summer temperature is average of 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 21 degrees centigrade. That's the high and the low both. So you have to cool off Minneapolis to at least 32 degrees Fahrenheit. But by the way, snow melts mainly by solar radiation, and it can melt at well below freezing. As anybody that lives where I live knows, when you get a spring storm, it dumps a foot of snow, sun comes out, it's 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and it starts melting at 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So when do we get net melting then? What temperature? How far down do we have to go below 32? Well, I went to a paper on Antarctica, and the Antarctica gets net melting along the low altitude edges when it rises to 14 degrees Fahrenheit from the journal Quaternary Research. So I'll be more conservative and say that if the average temperature of Minneapolis is 20 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer, then the ice will start building 1 inch, a foot at a time, then the next year even more. So that's a summer temperature drop of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Where are secular scientists going to get a temperature drop of 50 degrees Fahrenheit for an ice age? And by the way, you need a climate change just not for one summer. It's got to be many summers. So as you can guess, the ice age is actually a severe problem for uniformitarian scientists because they only have to explain this by climate change with present processes of climate change. What sort of present processes of climate change would produce this much of a temperature drop? Well, they haven't really got the foggiest idea. They appeal to something in the past called the astronomical theory of the ice age, or the Milankovitch mechanism, caused by slight changes in the Earth's orbit with time. And so you get slight changes in radiation, very slight. And they say, well, that did it. Well, no, that's too weak. And creation scientists, Jake Hebert and myself, have written a lot about the Milankovitch mechanism. That it's way too weak. So they got a serious problem of finding a drop of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So as you might think, it's a problem. And so a lot of experts on the ice age admit this, like J.K. Charlesworth in the book Quaternary Era on page 1532. Yeah, it was a 1,700-page book on the ice age. I loved it. It was very detailed. He was a very thorough researcher. He says Pleistocene, by the way, the word Pleistocene or Quaternary is their time scale for the ice age. Pleistocene phenomena produced some good theories, an absolute riot of theories, ranging from the remotely possible to the mutually contradictory and the palpably inadequate. And by the way, there's over 60 theories on how the ice age formed. And by the way, that was in 1957. This is modern times, right? And we know so much more. Well, oh, do we? Well, let's get another reference from 1997. U.S. News and World Report dedicated the whole issue to the 18 top mysteries of science. Some of you might have noticed that some of these mysteries are strange and are actually mysteries of their own making because they believe in evolution, like this one right here. Why should males exist? Well, in evolution, you should only have one sex that reproduces asexually. They can't figure out why there's a male and a female, and they write books and articles trying to figure out this great mystery every year. And guess what? This is where the biblical worldview has evidence hands down, because it simply says in Genesis, God made them male and female. But some of these are real mysteries, like what causes ice ages. So that made the top 10. What causes ice ages? They don't really know. In a more recent theory by David Alt about glacial Lake Missoula and its humongous floods, yeah, they have to believe in more than one glacial Lake Missoula flood, by the way, about 100 of them now during their last ice age. Anyway, he says, 2001, although theories abound, no one really knows what causes ice ages. They don't know. It's a huge problem to them. And in 2008, these two researchers said in the journal Nature, the most widely read journal in the world, perhaps the longest standing puzzle in the earth sciences is what caused the northern hemisphere ice sheets to come and go. Long standing, 200-year puzzle. So it is a problem to them. But can we explain it? Can the biblical worldview explain the ice age? Well, we need to know when it occurred, first of all. Was it before the flood? During the flood? After the flood? Well, it's obvious it's after the flood because these moraines and erratic boulders are all on surface features with thick sediments below them, sedimentary rocks from the flood. So it obviously followed the flood. So we can place it within a transitional climate between the flood and the present climate. This suggests strongly that the flood may have caused the conditions necessary for such a radical climate change, the ice age. And indeed, that is the case. So what about the flood would do it? Well, the flood was a great tectonic event, volcanic event, meteorite impacts, lots of volcanism. So at the end of the flood, you'd have a shroud of volcanic dust and aerosols. An aerosol is a particle about a micron one millionth of a meter in diameter, and they are so small they float up in the stratosphere for a couple of years, and they reflect the sunlight back to space, cooling mainly the summer over land. Doesn't affect the water, and doesn't affect the winters because of other heating features. Also, the fountains of the Great Deep and volcanism would cause a warm ocean at the end of the flood. This is a very key feature, this warm ocean, as well as the volcanic aerosols. And these mechanisms would persist after the flood, but wane with time. Wane because the volcanism decreases with time. Also, the warm oceans cool with time. And we can time the ice age by the cooling of the oceans. A very physical mechanism, cooling the oceans. So, Genesis flood can fulfill these requirements by the volcanic dust and aerosols during the flood, and even after the flood, there was huge volcanism, and the fountains of the Great Deep and volcanism causing the warm water. Here's a schematic showing dust and aerosols. Dust settles out in weeks to months, but aerosols will settle out in a matter of years to even up to 10 years, reflecting some of the sunlight back to space. Anyway, as evidence that there was a huge amount of volcanism during the Ice Age, Charles says signs of Pleistocene, that is Ice Age volcanicity and earth movements, are visible in all parts of the world. You see them, a lot of Pleistocene sediments, in a lot of ocean sediments from the Pleistocene. So a lot of volcanism occurred during the Ice Age to replenish the particles that fall out with time to keep the Ice Age going. So here's kind of a schematic of warm oceans at high and mid latitudes. Huge evaporation. And by the way, the key for the warm oceans is the warmer the temperature, the greater the evaporation. For instance, you can evaporate 7 times as much water vapor into the atmosphere at an ocean temperature of 30 degrees centigrade than at 0 degrees centigrade. 86 degrees Fahrenheit versus 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 7 times. And by the way, it would be at mid and high latitudes where the oceans would be a lot warmer than today's ocean. So you have a lot more water vapor in the air at high and mid latitudes. And volcanism and dust in the upper atmosphere falling on the cold land. That's kind of a schematic of it. So, do we need 100,000 years for an ice age, or even 40,000, as the secular scientists claim for each of their ice ages? So how rapid was the ice age? This is my evidence that the ice age was very rapid, right here. This is it, Jenkins. Indisputable proof that the ice age caught these people completely off guard. It dumped on before he got out of the outhouse. No, seriously, I had to estimate the starting temperature right after the flood and the ending temperature when it reached glacial maximum. So what I did was the cooling of the ocean drives the ice age, times it. It'll cool by cooling mechanisms, mainly conduction of heat to the colder air and evaporation. Evaporation is approximately 3 times as efficient as conduction. So by evaporation and conduction, you cool the surface layer of the ocean, and it sinks down to the bottom, and you have a huge overturn of the ocean as it cools. Significant effect for the bottom of the ocean, which no creationist has really got into yet. So, based on the cooling, the cooling versus the warming temperature would be the sunshine. So, I use this. It's called a heat budget equation. It's just like you turn on the heater and the air conditioner in a room, and you see which one's stronger. Well, in this case, the air conditioner was stronger, ended up cooling the room. In this case, cooling the ocean. And so it cools with time, so you can time it. So I assumed we went from 30 degrees centigrade average down to 10 degrees centigrade average. By the way, the average now is 4 degrees centigrade. So you reach glacial maximum before you reach the temperature today. So with 20 degrees centigrade cooling. I plugged it into the heat balance equation and used maximum minimums for these variables because there's no way to be accurate. I just wanted to bracket. So I got a maximum of 1765 years and a minimum of 174 years to reach glacial maximum. Best estimate was 500 years. Then you got to melt all this. First of all, you got to figure out what the average height of the ice sheets was. So I used maximum minimums for variables and got a range. And the best estimate for the northern hemisphere is 2,300 feet. For Antarctica, about 4,000 feet. Those are the best estimates. And then you got to melt it. And the best way to melt snow and ice is to use a physical equation that uses physics of snow and ice melt, that uses the heating terms, subtract the cooling terms. Once the ice gets up to 32 degrees, more heating causes net melting, and it starts to melt. That's how it works. So I use maximum minimums for this heat budget equation for snow and ice. The main variable is the albedo, or the reflectivity of the snow. That's a very key variable, and the climate models are horrible at modeling the change of albedo, which changes radically snow ages, for instance. So I use maximum minimums for the albedo, and I got a range along the edge, 40 to 100 years to melt. Best estimate 70 years. For the average ice thickness was 40% of the secular scientists, and there's lots of evidence for that thinner ice sheet than what they claim. I have two articles for the Scandinavian ice sheet and the Laurentide ice sheet in the Journal of Creation of the last couple of years. So time to melt, the interior is about 200 years, but the periphery about 70 years. The periphery is along the edge. So the total time for an ice age is only 700 years. This is an example where we use different variables from them. We use biblical variables, the flood, and we get a rapid ice age of 700 years. And they claim there's more than one. They used to say there's 4 ice ages. For 60 years, they used to claim 4 ice ages. In fact, everywhere they looked, they saw 4 ice ages. Now, that's interesting. Why did they only see 4? Well, actually, when you look at the glacial debris on the continents, you see evidence in most areas of only 1. So was there more than 1 ice age? Well, actually, I believe there was 2 ice ages. There was one before the flood around the Garden of Eden. And this is the Earth's first ice age right here. I got to explain this a little bit. In that when God created man and woman, he created us with no sin, and we had perfect communication at the time. But it doesn't work so well now. And since sin entered the world, communication is broken down. In general, to be very general, women have sensitivity issues and men have clueless issues. Anyway, seriously, there was only 1 ice age. And in most areas, you see evidence of just a single ice age, like this quote from the journal Geology. The title of this, a single late Wisconsin Laurentide glaciation, Edmonton area in southwest Alberta. Edmonton's in central Alberta. Great places for glaciers, ice sheets to occur. And so they're saying that there was only a single one. It was in the late Wisconsin and of the Laurentide. Anyway, that's what you see. And notice what they say in that. Glacial reconstructions commonly what? Assume a multiple glaciation hypothesis in all areas that contain a till cover. Till is glacial is jargon for glacial debris left over. So they assume it, and if they see some complications, maybe some till here, or maybe some sand in another till, you see, oh, that's 2 ice ages. That's how they did it, and that's how they came to 4 ice ages until the 1970s, and then the Milankovitch mechanism took over and claimed there's 50 now in the Pleistocene, based on deep sea cores. And how does that work? Well, they take these cores and they measure all these variables down there, and they wiggle around an average. So then they say, when it wiggles this way, it's a glacial. When it wiggles this way, it's interglacial. I think these are climate changes during the Ice Age, but they would say each one is a separate Ice Age. So we would interpret them a lot different than they would. So another question, they claim the glacial interglacial cycle is still here. Therefore, the next Ice Age is about due. And will there be a future Ice Age? Well, a lot of people think so. In fact, some people even think global warming will trigger it, which is kind of crazy. But anyway, here's the challenge they give us about the next Ice Age. They say we are still in the glacial interglacial cycle. Interglacials last about 10,000 years. The last Ice Age melted 10,000 years ago. Uh-oh. We're about due. And in fact, in the 1970s, for those people that like global warming, we actually had global cooling from 1945 to 1975. Global cooling for 30 years, during when carbon dioxide was going up tremendously. That's why there's more to all this global warming than what the hype is saying. Anyway, we had global cooling, and sea ice increased. And so a lot of books were written about the next Ice Age coming. Can we survive it? Articles were published in Newsweek and so forth. And so they said that Ice Age was coming. Anyway, in the New York Times, this was published. In the past, if the past is any indication, the Earth is at the end of another such warm period, poised to descend into a new Ice Age. That's from the New York Times. And we believe everything we read in the newspaper, do we not? I don't hardly believe anything from the newspapers anymore. Anyway, the rainbow is a sign that there'll never be another flood. And the flood caused the Ice Age. Therefore, there'll never be another Ice Age. So those out there in the audience that were sweating it can relax. And by the way, this gets back to my title of that the Bible explains it. Only the Bible can explain it because of the flood. Now, at this point, I go through the bonus features if I have time, which I do in this case. And besides the Ice Age, you had a lot of other things going on after the flood. Many, many different things going on. Just think of that, all that moisture being added by the warm oceans. That would cause a lot more precipitation in areas not glaciated. The climate would be a lot different. The general circulation would be different. Things would be quite different during the Ice Age. So I've gone into other areas. There's a lot of areas left to go. And these are features explained by this post-flood rapid Ice Age that the secular scientists cannot. And I'll go through these quickly, one by one. In my publications and resources, I go through these in a lot more detail. Anyway, the first one, deserts that were once wet. In Southwest United States, we had all these lakes. Even in Death Valley down here, which I don't show, had a lake 600 feet deep. Here's a lake right here around the Great Salt Lake. It was about 10 times the size of Great Salt Lake, 800 feet deep, while Great Salt Lake right now is only 12 feet deep. So all these lakes in the Southwest United States that is semi-arid today in these enclosed basins, how did they get there? Well, I would say the flood probably filled them up to start with. As the flood drained, it kept water was left in pockets. And they actually increased. We know that they actually grew during the Ice Age. I will probably say a little bit more about that soon. But anyway, you find shorelines from these lakes all over the place. Like here's Lake Bonneville shoreline. There's several shorelines. The highest one is here's the Lake Bonneville level, and the Provo level is a lower one. Anyway, you see shorelines all around where these lakes were. Here's one in east of the Sierra Mountains in California, where you had a mono lake that was about 800 feet deeper, called Lake Russell, and here's the shoreline on it. This shoreline happens to be right on a terminal moraine coming out of the valley from the eastern Sierras. So the what's called pluvial lakes were associated with glaciation because it's right, the shoreline's cut right on an end moraine. And here is southeast Oregon. You find some low level shoreline features in the desert areas of eastern Oregon. And the Sahara was wet. In fact, people lived in the Saharas. There's a huge amount of evidence of people and animals. Like this drawing, you find tens of thousands of these petroglyphs on rocks in the Sierras. Sierra was green. In fact, James Weller in The Great Sierra says this: the Sierra is a veritable art gallery of the prehistoric paintings. The evidence is enough to show that the Sierra was one of the well-populated areas of the prehistoric world. Yet there is man's work in the most inaccessible corners of the desert. Literally thousands of figures of tropical and aquatic animals, enormous herds of cattle, hunters armed with bows and boomerangs, and even domestic scenes of women and children in the circular huts in which they lived. It was green at one time, during the Ice Age, and even after for a while. So deserts were once wet. This can be explained by the greater amount of water vapor given off by the warm ocean. The woolly mammoths in Siberia. There's a woolly mammoth. It's a small mammoth. The Columbian mammoth was about 3-4 feet taller, the largest mammoth in the world at that time. Spiraling horns, had 3 layers of hair. The outside was about a meter long, a hump on its head, a hump on its back, and a sloping on the front of its back, shoulders, and a slumping back. Anyway, those mammoths are found all through the northern hemisphere. You can see in this red area here, but not in the central areas, the northern areas where the ice occurred, which indicates they're associated with the Ice Age. Some of them are in the southern part of where the ice occurred, and they either were there before the ice got in there or afterwards. So they all went extinct. And them and many other animals. And they don't know why the mammoths disappeared. This book by Larry Agenbrod and Lisa Nelson says, why did mammoths disappear from the earth? This question remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the past. Anyway, it can be solved by the post-flood rapid ice age, where probably about midway in the ice or early in the ice age, they got up into Siberia, crossed into Alaska, down the ice-free corridor in the United States, and some made into Central America. So this can all be explained by the rapid post-flood ice age. And why they would live in Siberia? Well, you can find out that if you took off the sea ice in the Arctic Ocean and left the temperature of the water at the freezing point of seawater, which is 28 degrees Fahrenheit, what kind of winter temperatures would you have in the Arctic and in Siberia? Well, this is in centigrade. The North Pole would be 40 degrees centigrade in the warmer in the winter, 20 degrees in northern Siberia. So a lot warmer in Siberia, just getting rid of the sea ice and keeping the temperature of the ocean water at 28 degrees Fahrenheit. But it was probably 70 degrees Fahrenheit at the start of the Ice Age, indicating you'd have a lot warmer temperatures in the winter over Asia. So the animals, some of them that can't tolerate much cold, can round the Bering Land Bridge into the United States that way. And of course, there's all kinds of onshore flow of warm air into Alaska and Siberia. Also, there's a strange mix of cold and warm weather animals and plants in glacial debris. This is called disharmonious associations. And we can explain the cold ones during the Ice Age, but what are these warm weather animals doing there in plants? By the way, this is not an anomaly. It's the rule of a mixture of cold and warm type animals. In fact, this book, Quaternary Extinctions, Graham and Lundelius, say late Pleistocene communities were characterized by the coexistence of species that today are allopatric, that is not climatically associated, and presumably ecologically incompatible. Disharmonious associations have been documented for late Pleistocene, that is Ice Age floras, that's your plants, terrestrial invertebrates, lower invertebrates, birds, and mammals. It's the rule, not the exception. How do they explain it? Well, they don't, because their ice ages are bitterly cold winter and summer. But in the post-flood model, we have warm winters. We have mild winters in many locations. In fact, one of the most outrageous examples of disharmonious associations is in Northwest Europe, where we have hippo fossils associated with cold climate animals like mammoths and reindeer. Anyway, early in the Ice Age, the warm onshore flow in the Atlantic Ocean would keep those areas warm. You'd have a very warm winter. You'd have warm summers for quite a while early in the Ice Age. So the hippos, and wet, by the way, warm and wet. So it'd be a great environment for hippos after the flood to migrate up into there. But as it cooled, glaciers started to form in the mountains. They were out of place. They couldn't escape. And so they ended up being buried with cold climate animals. And there's over 100 locations of hippos in England itself. For instance, Don Grayson said in that same book, in the Valley of the Thames, southern England, for instance, woolly mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, muskox, reindeer, hippopotamus, and cave lion had all been found by 1855 in stratigraphic context that it seemed to indicate contemporaneity. In other words, they lived together. They try to separate them into interglacials and glacials, but why would we're in an interglacial now? Why would a hippo want to migrate up to England in this interglacial? Doesn't make sense. Anyway, there was mass extinctions at the end of the Ice Age. Why is that? Well, here they are. 100 species of large animals disappeared in North America. That's 70%. And these are animals over 100 pounds. Europe and Asia lost 40%, Australia 90%, South America 80%, Africa only 20%. That's the latest statistics. They've changed a bit because of more further knowledge. They don't have a good statistics from Southern Asia, but Northern Asia they do. So why is that? Well, they really don't know. In fact, it only happened after their last ice age, which is kind of interesting. Why didn't it happen after the other 49 ice ages? Well, maybe those other ice ages did not exist. So it's a radical climate change at the end of the Ice Age. Instead of warm winters and cool summers, which support your disharmonious associations, winters became even colder than today. Summers gradually warmed. The ice sheets melted, sent fresh water over the high latitude oceans, forming sea ice right away. So temperatures got a lot colder and drier and so forth. So this has been a mystery for 200 years. A book published in 1999 said, after many decades of debate, the North American end Pleistocene megafaunal mass extinction remains a lightning rod of controversy. The extraordinary divergent opinions expressed in this volume show that no resolution is in sight. Some think it was climate change that did it. Some think that man did it in a huge slaughter. Some think that man spread diseases. So lots of controversy. Some believe in more than one. Anyway, they haven't been able to solve it. So they got a lot of problems that the post-flood one can explain. Anyway, here's the one about the unglaciated areas in Siberia, lowlands. That's where you find the woolly mammoths and the other animals. In Siberia and Alaska, there were at least 40 different types of mammals besides the woolly mammoth. And they're found in permafrost, that is permanently frozen soil at the surface. And there's millions of them based on the statistics I've seen from the Russian scientists, especially the New Siberian Islands right up in here and the coastal areas adjacent to that. And if the sea level dropped 100 meters, huge areas of the continental shelf would be exposed. So it'd be no problem for them to go from Siberia into Alaska. And early in the Ice Age, there would be a ice-free corridor caused by what's called downslope foehn winds off the Rocky Mountains from northern Canada down into Montana, where I live. And so that's where the animals pass through that ice-free corridor. And when they try to model glaciation, it's very hard to produce glaciation in these climate models because they're so imperfect. Anyway, one model actually produced glaciation in 1994. It was published in the Journal of Climate. Anyway, they're celebrating. We got glaciation now. Siberia and Alaska and the Yukon, including the lowlands, were among the first to glaciate. The first places to glaciate. They're great places for glaciers, but they weren't glaciated during the Ice Age. Anyway, they say we now have glaciation, but mainly outside the area where it existed during the last Ice Age. Oh, no. Yeah, the climate models have lots of problems, which is why I'm pretty skeptical about catastrophic global warming. A little bit of global warming, I think, is true, but not catastrophic. In summary, the Ice Age was a real event not that long ago. It was real. We have to explain it. It is a major mystery for evolutionary Earth science. Noah's flood caused the transitional climate for an Ice Age. Yeah, Ice Age lasted only 700 years. We don't need 100,000 years for an Ice Age. There was only one Ice Age. Only the Bible explains the Ice Age because of the flood. That's going back to my subtitle. And there will be no future Ice Age. A few concluding remarks. Creationists have a viable mechanism for the last major event in Earth history, while evolutionary scientists are far from a solution. Then why should we believe them for all those older hypotheses? Hundreds of older hypotheses about the evolution of this beastie and its death and extinction. They have all kinds of just so stories, as I call them. Why should we believe them for any of them if they can't explain the Ice Age? Another concluding thought. The Ice Age is an example of what can be done with hundreds of other Earth science challenges to the Bible. And this is crucial. Time is not a side issue. Some people are embarrassed by a short time scale. But a younger time scale sometimes is a key to solving major mysteries that have been lasted for 150 years. Well, how so? Well, they know that the volcanoes cool. And so, but you know, the aerosols settle out within 2 to 3 years. That it came up, if they were pushed up in the upper stratosphere, about 10 years. So each volcano going off, it's stretched out to tens of thousands of years, becomes insignificant in the long, big picture. And so they discount volcanism as a major cooling event because of that. But what if we telescoped all those volcanoes that are post-flood, and even the ones that occurred during the flood? By the way, there's 700 stratovolcanoes, and they're probably all active during the Ice Age. If we telescope all that volcanism to within several hundred years after the flood, we have a major cooling mechanism for the summer. So time's not a side issue, but it's key. Another more concluding thought, the Ice Age is based on the flood. Therefore, the flood, one of the most despised events by the culture, is a real event of the past. Therefore, it is easy to believe the whole Bible, which tells us how to live here on earth and how to go to heaven. That's ended, but I'm going to tell you about some of my resources. I've been working on this for over 45 years, writing articles and books. So as a result, I got a lot of resources out there for all ages, all technical abilities. In fact, I'm publishing another one on the Ice Age, an in-depth one is being reviewed by Creation Ministries International. Anyway, my main book for laymen is Frozen in Time, the Woolly Mammoth, the Ice Age. And it's actually been changed, the biblical key to their secrets, instead of just down the Bible. And as far as ice cores, see, there's a lot of subjects. Ice cores are a big challenge, but when you delve into it and look deeply at it, they're not really a challenge at all. Anyway, there's a book you can get, and it went out of print for a while, but now you can get it print on demand from Institute of Creation Research, The Frozen Record, dealing with the ice cores. Yeah. And if you like DVDs, Kyle Justice filmed me showing these features in the Northwest states about the Great Ice Age. And also he did it for the Lake Missoula flood, the Great Missoula flood. And I even have a book on the Lake Missoula flood. comparing what happened, what did the Lake Missoula flood produce, and comparing the landforms that it produced with those that you see on the surface of the earth today from the runoff of the floodwaters. And we see the similar landforms, but at a huge scale for the Genesis flood. And so you can get that. Oh, keep doing the same mistake. Got to go. And we have some children's book that my wife and I did, teaching about the Ice Age in story form. It's a fun read for young people and adults alike. And we have a sequel, Uncovering the Mysterious Woolly Mammoths. And for those that need something, a primer on geology, I wrote Exploring Geology with Mr. Hibb. The Ice Age has got a lot of geological stuff, so I've gotten into geology and geophysics over the years. And so this is one of the resources I have for children grade 6 and up, and even adults. There's one on dinosaurs too, I might add. And I wrote the weather book, which has been updated for newer material. It's a homeschool course also. And if you really want to know about global warming, I have a talk you get from CMI, the Great Global Warming Debate. I go through the data and tell you what the data really says. Anyway, I want to leave you with this verse. Your faith, from 1 Corinthians 2:5, your faith should not rest in the wisdom of men. That the wisdom of men is doctrines from the Enlightenment, deep time, the flood is not real, evolution that came later, by the way, because of uniformitarianism. It should depend on the power of God. God has the power to cause a flood, to create and do an ice age, no sweat. That's where our faith should be, not on the wisdom of men. And here's a few websites that would aid you. Creation.com is my favorite. Has over 11,000 articles for various age groups and various depth to them. I have a website, michael.oards.net, and on that I have 2 free ebooks you can get. Just read them. One is on the evidence of the runoff of the floodwaters in the field of geomorphology, the evidence that we had runoff that produced all these features on the surface of the earth that they can't explain. And then I have another book on where is the flood post-flood boundary, because I've worked inordinate amount of time to figure this out, because I have to separate what occurred during the flood and what occurred during the Ice Age, so that I have an Ice Age explanation for what occurred during the Ice Age and a flood for the flood. And so you can get this ebook, and I've published that book in a lot more detail on the Journal of Creation. So I'm going to open it up for questions now, and pass it back to you, Donnie or George. Still there?
Yes, yes, I was on mute, Mike. I didn't want to give you any background noise during that awesome presentation. I've got to say, that hour flew by. I can't believe it's over already. I'll be re-listening to this probably tonight. So much good information, Mike. Actually, if you wanted to just click that stop sharing button real quick, okay, and I think our main screen should pop up. There we go. There we go. We're good. I want to point out, Mike, a couple of thoughts that came to mind was I love how you point out that the global flood of Noah itself is the perfect event that fulfills the requirements for such drastic climate change, right? Necessary for the Ice Age.
Yes.
As biblical creationists, we have an explanation for the Ice Age, while the uniformitarians struggle to explain the necessary conditions for their multiple ice ages. And
cutting out.
Oh, am I cutting out there, Mike?
Yeah.
You're cutting out. So I didn't catch that.
Okay. It looks like your camera's back. Yeah, it looks like it was cutting out a bit. George, could you hear what I was saying, brother? Was I cutting out at all?
I could hear you, but Mike's camera was freezing up a little bit, so I think that's why he couldn't hear you.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah. It looks good though.
yeah.
It looks like whatever you did, Mike, seems to be fixed. But overall, I just want to point out great presentation, and I want to thank you so much, Mike, for all
You're welcome.
your amazing work. And last thing I'll say before we get into some questions, I'll hand it over to George. We've got a great lively chat. I want to thank everybody in the chat for their amazing support. We've got a ton of questions, super stickers, super chats coming in to help with the show, help with the ministry. But I like the way you ended it there. You pointed out that a young earth that the scoffers deny is key oftentimes in solving the major mysteries that have been around for over 150 years. So that
Yeah.
was a great point, and that really resonated with me. So thank you, Mike. George, I'll yield the mic and hand it over to you for a few words, brother.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a couple of things to what Mike actually said in support of the Ice Age. For those that don't know, there's been some considerable amount of work being done on fossils in Greenland, where they found fossilized leaves, and they could identify the species of these, or they could identify these leaves to a species of tree. And they found that these trees would only actually survive or grow in moderate Mediterranean type climates. So Greenland, for example, was once moderate in terms of climate, and also from written historical records from the Vikings. For those that don't know, the Vikings actually moved to Greenland, and they actually cultivated crops like corn. So Greenland was once lush and green. And as Mike mentioned, these mammoths would have moved to where all the green vegetation was, and they moved further north. And that's how they got caught in that ice age and buried by it. So, Mike, I hope I haven't said anything contradictory to what you said, but that's what I know about Greenland and some of that area adjacent to it.
Okay. You got to determine what is flood and what is post-flood there. Yeah, Greenland has warm climate vegetation at in the Cenozoic, as they would call it. But this goes along with warm climate vegetation in northern Canada, Siberia, and Antarctica. You find a lot of paleoflora, as they call it, showing warm climates at high latitude. So this just drives them crazy. In fact, the last one with the Pliocene, which was just before the Pleistocene, that had very warm climates. So it's very difficult for them to explain that. But I believe that's from the flood. That the vegetation, as well as some of the animals, like lemurs in the Axel Heiberg Island and Ellesmere Island and Queen Charlotte Islands of Canada, 80 degrees north. All these, they were transported up there by the flood, is what I've concluded. Now, there is a report that underneath the Camp Century ice core, they recently realized that there is some vegetation at the bottom. They found the bottom core after being missing for 50 years, and they analyzed and they found leaves and twigs, and saying, well, it melted about 200,000 years ago. I mean, they think it's been there for millions of years, by the way. So I'm going to write a little article on that for the Journal of Creation starting tomorrow. So that's post-flood there, and yeah, a lot of interesting things on the paleoflora. And I've published several articles on the paleoflora before.
Now, Mike, there are skeptics, and they point to ice core data where they identify deuterium and oxygen-18 isotopes.
Yeah.
And they actually cite peaks in the ice cores to identify 8 unique periods, suggesting there could have been up to 8 ice ages or glacial events which sort of
Yeah.
goes against that one ice age that you mentioned. So how do you actually explain those ice cores and the isotopes found in them?
Oh, yeah. Okay. In fact, I've got a 5-part series being published in the Journal of Creation as we speak. 2 parts have been published, and the next issue, which will come out in about 3 months, maybe part 3 and 4 will be there. I've reviewed. They reviewed all the first 4 parts that are sent to me. I've sent them back. So I'm trying to I go through all that stuff. Well, first of all, you look at Greenland and also West Antarctica. You see evidence of only one ice age there. You get only to the bottom, you find what they believe is interglacial, but that'd be the warm period caused by the warm water before it glaciated on Greenland, for instance, like the lowlands of Greenland, where those deep ice cores are drilled. But it only shows one ice age. It's only East Antarctica that shows many, and Vostok shows 4. It's Dome C that they key on that shows 8, and it's by the wiggles in the oxygen isotope ratio. First of all, they date these ice cores by matching them to the same wiggles they see in deep sea cores, which were dated by assuming the 100,000 year eccentricity cycle in the Milankovitch mechanism. So it's all big circular reasoning network on how you date Antarctic cores, because you can't date by the annual layers like you can in Greenland. Has nice annual layers just at the top. They thin out and they get diffused and messed up midway down there. But Antarctica has 2 little snow each year, and it blows around, so you can't have annual layers. So you got to go by assumptions. So they dated by deep sea cores, which are dated by Milankovitch. So there's a huge circular reasoning network, not only with ice cores, deep sea cores, but pollen cores, lots of other things that kind of fit it all into this Milankovitch mechanism. They claim that cycles because of the changes in the Earth's orbit. Jake Hebert and I have written a lot of papers on this subject. If people want to look at the in-depth literature on it, but we would explain like the Dome C. Let's take the Dome C. It has 8 wiggles. First of all, those first 4 wiggles, low down, are not very impressive. They're not very big wiggles. It's only when the top 4 wiggles where you really get some good oscillations in there. Well, in this series of papers I'm doing, and it's the same thing in Greenland, but different. There's a different situation. But in Antarctica, I believe that these oscillations with rapid accumulation of ice are decadal oscillations in volcanism that occurred after the flood that are unique to each hemisphere. Each hemisphere is separate because you don't have much exchange in the atmosphere or the oceans between the hemispheres. And so the volcanism in the southern hemisphere determines, causes the lower, more glaciation, faster accumulation, and other variables that are correlated with it that causes the glacial wiggles. And when you have a lull in volcanism, it goes to it goes up. So I've correlated all these things, and due to decadal. Now, decadal oscillations are oscillations that are a couple decades, maybe anywhere from 10 years to 50 years. That's a time scale. And this would occur during the post-flood rapid ice age. During ice buildup, you'd have these causing these oscillations. And I published the basis behind this in 1990 in my in-depth book, which is out of print. That is due to oscillations in volcanism in each hemisphere.
Well, that's an incredibly informative answer, Mike. That was awesome. I appreciate that. We do have a a super chat that came in. A super chat is just where our supporters will donate to the ministry with a question attached to it, Mike. So this question comes from Nephilim Free. I appreciate the support and the question. He says, question for Oard. Is there much movement towards accepting that ice layers do not represent individual years in the scientific community?
Oh, no, there's no movement in the scientific community. They've assumed they've been there for millions of years, and each annual layer, like on the top of Greenland, and it's like this on West Antarctica too. That's about that thick of ice, about 20 to 25 centimeters. And as each build up each year, it pushes it down and squeezes it to the side. So each annual layer thins and thins. And if you assume it's been there a million years, each layer becomes so thin, it's as thin as a dime by the time you reach the bottom. That's your annual layer. In our time scale, you can have 6 meters of ice for the first several years. And so it would compress some to say 3 meters, but all the wiggles from storms are not diffused out when you have a higher precipitation rate. So they would be counting storm layers and layers within storms, these oscillations, as a year. Well, we would consider them storms or within storm oscillations in various things like oxygen isotope ratio, because the storm layers annual oxygen isotope has an amplitude about the same as the annual layer in Greenland. So that's the difference. And they're totally into uniformitarianism, millions of years, and they have this model. They date it by flow modeling is one of their dating methods. So it becomes paper thin, and so they count all kinds of wiggles. We know that there's a lot of circular reasoning going on, because when they first counted in Greenland, they got 85,000 wiggles. But when they got about near the bottom of the GISP 2 ice core, drilled in early 1990s, and they counted 85,000, but they said it was wrong because, according to the Milankovitch theory, it should be 110 layers by that level. So guess what they did? They went back and redated the bottom 500 meters using a sophisticated laser light mechanism that has a resolution, instead of 8 millimeters, it's 1 millimeter. And guess what? It got a lot more wiggles down there in that bottom 500 meters, and it magically became 110,000 layers down, or years at the bottom.
Wow.
Circular reasoning based on the Milankovitch or astronomical theory of the Ice Age.
I know this is a bit of rough maths here, Mike, but I was doing a bit of research last night, and I got these numbers from the Australian government Antarctic program. They state that the mean thickness of the Antarctic ice sheet is 2.16 kilometers, with the maximum known thickness of the ice sheet is 4.8 kilometers in the Terrier Dell. Now, I being an engineer, I like a little bit of maths, so I sort of compared that with the average snowfall or thickness of ice above. Sorry.
Oh, I think Mike is cutting out a little bit there. Mike, it looks like your camera might be frozen. It looks like we got you back, Mike. So I'm not sure. It looks like it.
Anyway, I see a lot of questions. Chat.
Mike, it looks like you're. It looks like
freezing.
Your camera might be freezing. Maybe.
Oh.
Mike, maybe shut off your camera for now, and we'll see if we can save some bandwidth. But it looks like we got you back, Mike.
Camera, I guess that's.
It looks like we do have you back, though, Mike.
Okay. I have a lot of questions that are piling up here. I see them.
Yes. I want to get to these questions. Maybe we'll do a rapid fire Q&A. Mike, are you hearing us again? Is your connection back?
Yes.
Okay. My
Yes.
recommendation. Okay. Perfect. My recommendation would be next, if it does happen again, oftentimes if you click the stop cam button right next to the mute button,
Okay.
that'll save bandwidth and you won't have that issue again. So,
Okay.
so George, we're gonna fire through these questions.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to do that right now.
There we go.
That's good.
So that should solve the issue.
Okay.
So our next question would be, well, let me see here. A question just came in. At least I could put this one on screen. Question from Baldy Cat. I appreciate the question. What is Michael's view on climate change records specifically?
I'm getting
Are we losing you again, Mike?
Yeah, I can't hear him.
He might want to, I don't know if it's an internet issue or what. He might want to jump out of the stream and then jump back in, just kind of refresh it. Because the last time he was on, we had him on for almost 3 hours with no issues. So maybe if you wanted to just refresh it. Mike, can you hear us at all?
Yeah, I'm hearing you now.
Okay. Sometimes an easy fix is to leave the stream and then click the link and come back in just to refresh it. But if you can hear us now, we can kind of move on and hope that things are fixed from here.
Okay.
Okay, we'll try this for now.
Send the question.
Okay, so the question comes in from Baldy Cats. He asks, what is Michael's view on climate change records?
Well, they've been taking measurements of temperature. Now, there's a lot of glitches in those temperature records. So they claim about 1.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree centigrade warming since about 1880. But, and especially in the polar areas where it's amplified because the snow and ice is melted. So I believe all those records, but I think the temperature record may be exaggerated, but I'll take it for data to start with. And we know the CO2 has been going up, but we can run correlations.
Mike, it looks like you're kind of breaking in and out. I think we're losing you. Did you want to maybe exit the stream?
Rising.
Yeah, Mike, we can't hear you. It might be a good idea to leave the stream and then come back by clicking that link.
Oh wow!
That Standing sent you in the email.
It sounds like it's a connection issue, possibly on your end, Mike. So sometimes if you were to, we've had this happen before with guests on, and typically when they leave the show and then kind of refresh and come back in, usually that fixes it. And then George.
Yep.
I'm going to go over a couple reminders and announcements for the. Okay. I'm going to go over a couple announcements, George. If you wanted to mute yourself and give Mike a quick call, because he did give us his number to give him a call if there's any glitches. And at the same time as you're doing that, I can go over some reminders with the audience. Might be a good time. So I wanted to remind everybody that tomorrow we have our third event for the Genesis Flood Week on Standing for Truth. We have Sal Jardina back with us. We're going to be discussing how geology demonstrates and confirms the flood. We're also going to be having a Q&A that kicks off at 8 p.m. EST. So make sure you're here, bring your questions. Should be a lot of fun. It's going to be Sal's second time with us. And let me see. I think I got... Mike, it looks like your camera is... Can you hear me, Mike? We've got you in the stream, Mike, but I'm not too sure if you can hear me or if your connection's improved at all. Okay. We'll wait for George to call.
I don't have his email with his phone number standing.
Okay, here, let me get it for you real quick. Because it's definitely a connection issue. Let me see. I'm going to put it in the private chat, George.
Okay.
Just 1 second.
Hello?
Oh, there we go.
Mike, we got you. Can you hear us, Mike?
I got some great questions here.
Yeah. Is the connection improved, Mike? Can you hear us?
So, what are we going to do?
We can definitely start asking you some of these questions, Mike. I just want to make sure that your connection is okay and you can hear us at this point. Are we coming through, Mike? Can you hear us? Okay, I'm going to give Mike a call real quick, just so.
United States and for connection. The internet's up.
We do see a couple comments in the chat. Somebody saying that they had this earlier on their podcast. The internet gremlins are out today, he's saying.
Can I suggest something standing? Michael, is there someone else in the household that may be using the internet at the same time?
Okay, here, I'm going to go on a intermission here, and I'm going to give him a quick call. So I'm going to put so we'll be back in just a few minutes, guys, just so we can fix this. We'll try one more time with Mike.
He's coming back.
Any improvement at all, Mike? Okay, we'll be back, guys. I'm going to, on a brief intermission, I'm going to give him a call.
Yeah, there.
Mike, can I ask, is there anyone else in the household that may be using the internet at the same time as yourself?
No, because I have the laptop up in my office and I have the other computer here. So
Okay.
No, I got both computers. And I can hear you. I heard that.
Maybe there's an improvement. We might be good now, Mike. So is our audio coming in okay now?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe we're in luck. Maybe it was just a couple minutes there of connection issues. But if you can hear us, we can jump right to the next question if you want.
Okay, let's go for it.
All right.
SFT, standing, would it help if you turn off your camera as well?
I can try. I don't think it's coming from my end, but we'll see if there's an improvement. And there's so many questions there. So George, since I just asked the one on climate change, you pick one of those questions and we'll run with it. Maybe we'll go with Ryan, the Raptor guy's question, George, since he asked it a while ago. Go ahead, brother.
Okay, Mike. Ryan, the Raptor guy, has asked a question. Does Dr. Oard think the unfossilized rhinos horses, and other animals at the ashfall fossil beds from the flood or post-flood. I'm not familiar with the ashfall fossil beds. Is he talking about the Ashley fossil beds?
No, ashfall fossil beds in northeast Nebraska. I'm familiar with them.
All right.
That was a tough one. I had a debate with Carl Frody about it. He thought they were post-flood. I examined it twice, the site and other features. And even though there are features there that would indicate post-flood, I determined I think it's flood. And I gave several reasons. I have 33 criterion to determine the boundary, and I use those criterion. One of them was a formation of gravel, quartzite gravel from the Rocky Mountains that was spread clear out into Nebraska that was associated with them. And that's a flood signature, a spreading of resistant gravels. By gravel, I mean up to cobble size out there. And that's to me is a big signature that it was from the flood. And let's see, what else? There were several other things. And some of the animals that were fossilized were not ones you see during the Ice Age at all. There were some really strange ones. But like I said, there are other indications that it's from the flood. So that's a tough area. Most areas where I've evaluated the flood post-flood boundary, I've found it fairly easy, but that's one of several that I found it difficult. And I had to look at all the data I can before I made up my mind. And I think it's from the flood. And I've written about it. It's in the Creation Research Society Quarterly, what I wrote about it and what Carl Frody wrote about it.
Mike, one of the evidences that I point to with the Ice Age is the frozen stomach contents of the animals that were fossilized. In the secular sort of scenario where you'd get an Ice Age occurring slowly and gradually over time, that piece of evidence just contradicts that slow, gradual Ice Age. And would you like to talk about that the frozen contents in the stomach of the mammoths as evidence for a global flood and a quick Ice Age?
Well, it would be evidence that they were frozen pretty fast. So the main question has always been how fast? Bird's Eye Frozen Food Company said, well, it has to drop instantly to 150 degrees centigrade or Fahrenheit, I forgot which, below zero. Flash frozen, in other words. And I looked at the data and found that as far as stomach contents, you find some stomach contents with mastodons in the Northeast United States, and no one believes that they were flash frozen. Also, the state of vegetation in the stomach indicated different seasons of death for those mammoths. And a flash freeze would have happened all at once in one instant, according to people who've written about it. And so different seasons indicated that they died at different times. Also, I examined the digestive system for elephants. Elephants and mammoths are very similar. And the digestion system, the food does not digest in the stomach. There's acid there that partially breaks down the vegetation. The digestion occurs after the stomach for mammoths and elephants. So the stomach is just mainly a holding pouch for their food, and it's partially decayed, but you have to freeze it fairly fast. So I postulate a moderate freeze from cold fronts from when it was much colder in winter in Siberia than now. And they're interred in the permafrost because they're in windblown silt, and the permafrost comes up into the windblown silt, as well as the cold air freezing it from the top. So it was a moderate freeze at the end of the Ice Age. And that's when they all went extinct at the end of the Ice Age. I hope I answered that question.
Yes, you did. That was a great question and great answer, Mike. Here's a question that has come in quite a bit, a question that I have on my mind as well. And since you're here, and I know you've written on this in your book that I've got in front of me, Rock Solid Answers, the question essentially is, do varves, the existence of varves, contradict young Earth creation and the global flood, Mike?
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of secular scientists think so. But when you look at that extensively, which I've done, I wrote a two-part article on it in the 1980s in the Creation Research Society quarterlies. I especially examined the Swedish varves. First of all, you got to realize that these varves are really rhythmites, alternating two or more subcouplets. They're rhythmites that form in 1 year, they believe. But you can form rhythmites like turbidity currents, distal or the finer turbidity currents will have multiple rhythmites. In the Muir Inlet, that was glaciated in about 1700. The glacier's been receding, and you've had heavy sedimentation, and you've had rhythmites form as much as one per day from the mud and stuff that's given off by the glacier that's receding. So you can form more than 1 year. So they're not necessarily varves. They have to prove that they're a 1 year cycle, and they can't do that. And these varve scales are just short sequences of rhythmites, maybe about we'll say 200 in one area, and then you go and they try to match the wiggles in the varves, the dark and the white layers and the thick varve layer sequence with the bottom of another. And so that's how they did this all the way up through in Sweden north, and got about 10,000 years. They did it in Northeast Canada and Southeast Canada, the Northeast United States also. And it's all superficial and based on assumptions that there really are varves, that you can really connect them like that. Dozens of sequences connect the bottom and the top of one or the other. So, yeah, you have mechanisms to form rhythmites fast, and a lot of different types of scenarios. So the varves really do not show what they think they are. They're based on too many uniformitarian assumptions.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, Mike. Yeah, Mike. On that one, I believe there were cores done at Lake Sagutsu in Japan, and in two of the cores, they found ash layers, and the number of layers between the ash layers were different. So if they represent years, then why did we get more, I guess, varves in one core than the other?
Oh, yeah. You have those situations. Also, the Green River Formation has 6 million of these rhythmites in some places. And yeah, they don't correlate between ash layers there either. So there's a lot more going on. And you can form these rhythmites rapidly by especially turbidity currents, what they call distal turbidity currents. That's after they're been transported a long distance, they thin out and they form layers. They form layers, and so you find a lot of these in the rock record, these rhythmites, and so they are always trying to make a case that they're varves and or 1 year oscillations, and it's speculative on their part, and so a lot of this, like the Lake Sugistu, if I pronounced it right, in Japan, a lot of this stuff is just dated by assuming the Milankovitch mechanism, and that stretches out the last ice age 100,000 years, and so forth and so on for each other ice age, and so they blend things into these time scales, and a lot of this is circular reasoning with dating methods that are questionable and based on assumptions and uniformitarian assumption. So there's a lot more that I can say and write about it. There's a lot more research projects involved in all this for the post-flood time scale. Anyway, that's about all I can say about varves.
Yeah, that's a really helpful response, Mike. That was really good, and I appreciate that. Especially on such a common objection from the uniformitarians, an objection that they almost say is unanswerable by us. But, as you've shown here, you've given a great answer. I appreciate that. This question I have here, Mike, kind of brings us back to the post-flood ice age in terms of biogeography, because the question is, Mike, do floating log mats, do you believe they help explain at least some of the Earth's biogeography post-flood?
Oh, yeah. Land bridges. There was a land bridge between France and England that broke during the Ice Age, and that's how the hippos got over to England. There was a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, and I think this land bridge was exposed early in the Ice Age because some of the mammals that I analyzed that rounded it and where they're found told me. In fact, I wrote a paper on that in the journal Creation, I think about a year ago, on the land bridge, but others have to be explained by the log mats. For instance, I think there are Australian marsupials have to be explained by log mats. First of all, I have a paper that I've submitted to Journal Creation on these marsupials, and first of all, when they found them, they thought they were all Pleistocene, which means the Ice Age period. But then because they date, they actually have a unique dating system for those marsupials. It occurs in South America and North America too. It's called stage of evolution. So when they find a particular marsupial, they say, well, that's a little different than what we expect. It's got a primitive feature here. Oh, primitive. Oh, it's got to be older. So let's shove it into the Pliocene or the Miocene. So they keep shoving these things back based on the stage of evolution. That's how they've been dating there for years. They have very few radiometric dates to lock all this in. And so it's all a house of cards. And then I always try to explain how we would explain. I mean, the Lord's led me to answer challenges. And so I got to say, how did they get there? Well, I think the only way we can explain them, they couldn't have got there by a land bridge from Southeast Asia, because there's too many deep straits in Indonesia between Southeast Asia and Australia and New Guinea. And so I don't think they could have got there on a land bridge, or I don't think they could have gone there by island hopping either. So the only possibility is by log mats, where they they migrated south, maybe in mass. I don't know why they stayed together, but it appears that they stayed together and ended up on the shores of the Indian Ocean somewhere. And log mats were floating around. Some were beached, and they got on these log mats, and they were spread hither and yon, and ended up in Australia, probably northern Australia to start with. And other features of that I noticed that would support this is that some of the animals that had to be on log mats were snakes, and other creatures besides marsupials, and some insects. So and they couldn't have got there by even a land bridge. So they have to come by a log mat regardless. So the log mat idea, I think, seems pretty strong. And so the article's in review right now, and maybe will come out in a year, depending on how fast. Publishing's very slow, by the way. Sometimes it takes 3 years for something to get out that I do. So I find it frustrating that it's so slow. By the time they get back to me, I've forgotten half about what I wrote.
Yeah, I can see how that would be frustrating. We kind of talked about that last time. And it's even frustrating for me. I'm addicted to reading these articles and papers. I've spent a great deal of time reading through your huge number of articles and papers coming out of CMI. And this question I have is it pertains to some articles you've submitted in regards to some possible objections regarding the fossil distribution of animals post-flood, including the marsupials, as it relates to your position on the post-flood boundary. Now, I know we could probably talk about that all day, but for the audience sake, especially some of the new viewers, I was wondering if you could touch on some of the content in those articles and papers that you've submitted in terms of refuting those objections, Mike.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I submitted them 6 months ago, 4 of them. The Australian one was actually, there was 2 of them for Australia. One was to explain how I would explain how they got there, and second, did a critique with the uniformitarian ideas. Then I had one on North America. The key question is, we have a lot of mammals in North America in the Cenozoic, and it's claimed that they have to be post-flood. So that's been the question all along, and I've examined that. And first of all, the person that challenges me on that set up several straw man arguments, saying that if I believe that those Cenozoic mammals are from the flood, what I have to believe is that before the flood, that they left North America, rounded the Bering Land Bridge to where the Ark was, somewhere in Asia. And then after the flood, they migrated back to exactly where, after the flood, for the Ice Age fossils, and they died exactly on their Cenozoic representatives in the Cenozoic rocks. Well, first of all, we don't have to migrate them from North America to where the Ark was. They could be living near the Ark or on one big landmass. North America wasn't existent then. Secondly, it was claimed that the climate would be too cold for them to round the Bering Land Bridge in Siberia. They were thinking of present-day climate. No, during the Ice Age, it was a mild winters and cool summers, as I said in my talk. So a lot of them would have no climatic problem rounding the Bering Land Bridge after leaving the Ark. And so mammoths and 40 other creatures, mammals, came into Siberia, Alaska, then down the ice-free corridor in Alberta and Montana, into the southern United States and Central America and South America. That's how they would go after the flood. And so So that there was some straw man. But anyway, I looked at the North America genera that were supposed to be in the Pleistocene, defined as post-flood, and the pre-Pleistocene was defined as the flood from my point of view. And I found out that a lot of these North American mammals, see, it's the claim that why would they migrate just to North America and die with their ancestors? Well, the problem is they're not necessarily North American mammals. You find them on other continents. You find them in Asia and Europe, Africa. So we're not talking about unique North American mammals rounding the barren land bridge and dying above its Cenozoic ancestors, from my point of view. No, not at all. The Cenozoic mammals could be transported long distances from who knows where. So I've answered a lot of that stuff, but there's still questions that need to be explained. And I was planning on writing 2 or 3 more papers, but I got bogged down into other projects and have not got back to that. So it's been 6 months since I sent it in, and I haven't heard anything yet. So I don't know how it's going.
Well, I got to say,
that's a quickie on that.
That's great. That's a great answer. Extremely helpful. And I got to say, I'm looking forward to hopefully those articles being released at some point, and therefore going through them and reading them. So that was a great answer. And I think we all wish there was just more time in the day, given how many projects, just how many projects you want to get through. So, George, I know you had a question as well, brother. Yes. I don't want to hog the mic here, but George, go ahead.
Yeah, Mike, there was a question from Andrew P. that was posted early into our presentation. He's asking how to explain, and I hope I don't butcher this, and I hope you understand my pronunciation of it. He says, asking how to explain lacustrine indicators in the GRF and the Bidahotchi Formation, such as exploded fossil fish, basin-centered paleocurrents, and Mar craters. That question is in the private chat if you want to read it yourself.
Yeah, I did. There's a lot that can be said. You got to figure out where the post-flood boundary is and all this stuff. And there's ways to interpret like the Green River Formation as post-flood lake. And there's other ways to look at it. John Whitmore and I had a debate about this very subject in 2006 in the Journal of Creation. You can get it all online from creation.com. And anyway, he pointed out what he thought was a post-flood lake. He wrote his PhD thesis on the fossil fish in the Green River Formation. We spent a week together out there looking at various features. And one feature I noticed he overlooked was that the huge amount of erosion in the area. That's the thing that first got me. You go to one of the basins, Fossil Basin, and you can go up over 2,000 feet up a slope. And all the sediments in that whole area were at least eroded 2,000 feet. Now that is an incredible amount of activity after the flood, but that's not the end of it. I discovered in the southern part of the Green River Formation that the Green River Formation was part of what's called the San Rafael Swell. That's a big bowing up of the strata, about 100 kilometers north-south and about 50 kilometers east-west. And the middle of it got eroded off, leaving the edges dipping away from the center. And by trigonometry, I calculated based on the 8-degree dip of the strata to the north, with the Green River Formation being the top formation, I discovered that the San Rafael Swell was eroded about 17,000 feet. 17,000 feet of erosion in the center of it. And the Green River Formation was the top formation on and that San Rafael Swell. So what does that tell you? If it's post-flood, you got to deposit the Green River Formation over a huge area, 40,000 square miles, up to 6 kilometers deep near the Uinta Mountains, 6 kilometers deep. And then you got to bow up this swell, erode it, all after the flood, rode 17,000 feet. And where did the sediments go? They're not found anywhere nearby. They're swept clean off the continent. This is an obvious flood signature. And I published this article. You can look it up in 2009 in the Answers Research Journal. Not only that, the Green River Formation has so much oil in it that it has enough energy to supply the energy needs of the United States for 100 years. Where are you going to get that much oil after the flood in a lake and get that thick of sediments over a huge area? No, so much of it doesn't make any sense for a post-flood lake. But like I said, there are indications there that would indicate that. So something happened in the flood to account for some of those features that they talk about as evidence for the post-flood lake. And John Whitmore did challenge me in a few areas on that, and I haven't any answers on a flood formation. The flood waters were draining. So that's it for the Green River Formation. The Betahoche Formation is a little more complicated. You're going to see something about that for those that actually subscribe to the journals. Recently, Steve Austin and two others defended the dam breach hypothesis for the origin of the Grand Canyon, which I believed at one time until I went out there and looked closely and found so many contradictions that with time I gave it up. I didn't give it up right away. I was hoping those that believed in it would answer it. Betahoche Formation is part of this. But anyway, they wrote in the early 2020, they wrote an article in the Answers Research Journal. Well, anyway, I've done a response that'll be published in the Creation Research Society Quarterly in the next issue, going through their challenges and answering them. And the Betahoche Formation is, it's intriguing. It's mostly a volcanic or fluvial deposit. There's a little bit of what's called lacustrine. Now, by the way, lacustrine, and this goes along with a lot of other paleoenvironmental deductions. Those are all based on uniformitarian assumptions. Lacustrine, generally what they call it, they define it as lacustrine. They find some rocks, cobbles, rounded. Well, that's automatically fluvial up from a river. And so on and so forth. They got dozens of these paleoenvironmental interpretations, all based on crass uniformitarianism. You bring the flood back, and these things are not necessarily lacustrine, even though late in the flood you could have some pockets of lacustrine that look like lacustrine formations. That's probably how I would explain the Green River Formation. So fluvial, of course, would be runoff. I find a lot of rounded rocks in Montana and Washington and Wyoming and that were eroded from the Western Rockies, clear out into central Saskatchewan, southwest Manitoba, central North Dakota, 800 miles from their source. Rounded rocks, quartzites, resistant, tough rocks. And they would just say these are from rivers. Well, they're all over the place. They form sheets, billions, trillions of them, east of the Continental Divide. They came from west of the Continental Divide, 800 miles. So to them, this would be fluvial. To me, it'd be flood runoff. So you could see that the various mindsets define the terms. So the term lacustrine is a very vague term, as well as many other paleoenvironmental interpretations. I hope that answered the question kind of in a roundabout way.
Well, yeah. Well, that was a very in-depth answer. Actually, I think Andrew would be happy with that. I'm not sure where SFT has gone, but I've got just one more question to ask with regards to the magnetic polarity changes. You recall I mentioned the ice cores earlier, but
Yeah.
they claim that there's been a number of magnetic polarity changes in those ice cores. How do we explain those?
Let's see. I don't believe that they're in the ice cores. They're in deep sea cores.
Oh, sorry. Yes, you're correct.
Well, Humphreys, I think, has a great mechanism that during the flood there was a lot of oscillations in the magnetic field reversing rapidly. You can look in his material on that, and then but it continued after the flood and damping out during the ice age. And I go along with that model. Yeah, this is and then they got a whole time scale called the standard polarity time scale. And this was developed in the 60s by potassium argon dating. See, they had to date all these accurate so that they can get reversals and normals with time. And I think there was a lot of fudging that went on in all that data. But by the way, in the 60s, the potassium argon dating method was not very good. And so I think there's a lot of shenanigans that went on in developing this polarity time scale. But be that as it may, we need to explain the evidence for reversals and which are about 50% reversals in like lava rocks and in marine sediments too, and the normals. So I would use Russ Humphrey's a mechanism for the magnetic field. I think it's a pretty good model, and that explains them. And they continued for a while during the ice age. And by the way, they talk about dating these things. They have, if you saw the polarity time scale, the last reversal was about 780,000 years ago. Went from a reversal to the Bruns normal, and they use that boundary to date other things. By the way, lots of circular reasoning. But when you look at the literature on this, I should publish an article. It's one of those many articles I need to publish, but don't have time. When you look at the Bruns normal, 780,000 years, you look at it, and there are short segments of reversals through it, about 10 of them, where the polarity went from normal to reverse really quick, and they call them excursions. One of the main ones is called the last camp excursion, 42,000 years ago on their time scale, where it reversed and lasted several hundred years and went back to normal. Well, with so many reversals and normals throughout this time scale, you can have very precise dates to really pinpoint all this stuff. And that's where the problem lies, is that it's just too complicated for them to really do that. The dating methods aren't that precise. And there's so many of these reversals, not only the main ones, but also these excursions, which are supposed to be tiny ones that last a short time. And sometimes they don't reverse totally the whole way. And so many of them, it's just a mishmash of polarity changes. So I consider it a big problem. By the way, paleomagnetism doesn't date anything because it's just a sequence of reversals and normals that if you include a faster sedimentation rate or a hiatus somewhere, you can make any sequence in the deep sea cores fit the polarity timescale by adding faster sedimentation, slower sedimentation, or a hiatus, a gap. And that's what they've been doing all this time to make everything fit and look like it's really consistent, and it's not. Anyway, I should write an article on that. Anyway, what they do is they have to date these reversals by other mechanisms. They got to say, is this sequence Pliocene 4 million years ago, or is it Cretaceous 100 million years ago? So they date by other mechanisms to put the same sequence in various slots. And so it has to be dated by other mechanisms. So in itself, it's not a dating method. It depends on the other dating methods. Same with the Milankovitch cycles. They depend on other dating methods to calibrate it. For what time periods, the Pliocene, Cretaceous, you don't know unless you date it by another method. So there's a lot of circular reasoning and correlating one dating method to another. So there's a lot of problems in all this. And I've only touched on the part of the iceberg above the water.
Well, I just want to say one thing, George, because I want to point out how I love how thorough your answers are, Mike. And there's just so much good information, even in just this one show. We've had people in the chat point out, they're going to rewatch this a few times just to get all the information. I really love your passion on these important topics. And a question that came to mind based on what you're saying, because to be honest with you, your answers are so informative and thorough that you're answering a lot of questions that we have all in one. For example, the dating method question. I've heard the critics, I've heard the uniformitarians say, we've got so many different dating methods that all corroborate each other. They all correlate on deep time, right? But from the sound of it, you're pointing out that is that based on circularity, or, what's the answer to that?
Yes, it's based a lot, mostly on circularity, where they correlate one method to another. In fact, Marvin Lubenow actually demonstrated this because, they don't publish a lot of dates, so you can't really check all this stuff. Anyway, there was a big dispute over Leakey's 1407 skull. I think that's the name of it. And they had to piece it together from several hundred pieces. And it was first dated 2.8 million years by 6 different methods, one of which was paleomagnetism, 2 were fossil dates. So 6 methods, and they all agreed it was 2.8 million years. And that's what they published. Oh, but the paleoanthropologist said that skull, which was pieced together, is too modern. It can't be that old. So they redated it and used 5 out of 6 of the previous dating methods. And lo and behold, they got 1.8 million years. And five of them agreed with that. And so he's in his book, Bones of Contention. The first edition, he has it, but in the second edition, he left it out. And I really had a problem with that. But anyway, it's published online on creation.com. You can obtain it there and show how these were all correlated, make them look precise. It's all through circular reasoning that they did this. And this is probably just the tip of the iceberg for this sort of thing, because we can't verify. Oh, by the way, they found some old dates on some of them to over 200 million years were some of the dates that they got back with argon, or potassium argon method. I can't remember which. And then they threw those out, and then they got other dates that were 6 million years and 4 million. They got a lot of dates. Anyway, they pick and chose the dates that were closest to what they expected. And it's admitted I got a great quote where they actually pick and choose the dates that agree with what they believe from geology. And John Woodmarape has other great quotes in some of his books on how they pick the date that they believe is true out of probably a smattering of dates. So anyway, it's all a bag of worms. if people want to know more about it, I actually have a book on dating called The Deep Time Deception, Examining the Case for Millions of Years,
Right.
put out by Creation Ministries International. So I do touch on these things. This book was written for total laymen that have no science background. So it's not very deep. They want to get some deep stuff. Look at Andrew Snelling's stuff. But anyway, this is for laymen to get them started and to show the case that we can defend a young Earth. And there's lots of problems with these dating methods.
I've got that quote, Mike, if I can read it. It's by E.H. Andrews, Professor of Materials, University of London, and Head of the Department of Materials at Queen's Mary College. In a book, God, Science and Evolution, he says, quote, "Whatever the figures arrived at by the dating tests, they are weeded out before publication in scientific journals. If they do not accord with the preconceived dates assigned to the evolutionary geology column." And then there's another one by Richard L. Morga. He's associate professor of geology at East Carolina University. He says, in general, dates in the correct ballpark are assumed to be correct and are published, but those in disagreement with other data are seldom published, nor are discrepancies fully explained. And I've got more quotes that say that, but yeah, the KBS Tough is an embarrassment, isn't it? With the
yes,
the range of dating methods that they used and the range of dates that they received that contradicted each other.
Right. I hadn't heard those quotes before, but I got other ones.
Yeah, like I said, there's heaps of them. You just have to search.
Yeah.
There's quote after quote of them admitting to the circularity. Mike, I want to point out that was a great answer, and you have so much good material available for everybody. That's why it's such a blessing to have you on. And I wanted to ask something based on what you were saying earlier. You were pointing out how you've had some cordial debates and dialogue with fellow creationists on some of these issues, right? And
yes, I have.
And correct me if I'm wrong, because I've read so much on CMI, but I do recall, I believe that you've had a written debate on some of these issues with Dr. John Baumgartner.
Correct.
Okay. I was kind of curious. What were a couple of those issues? What was the debate on? The bigger picture. I find that interesting, and I have read through that. It was a while ago, but it kind of came to my mind when you pointed that out, Mike.
Yeah, I think it was in 2002. There's an online debate in the journal Creation with John Baumgartner and myself on catastrophic plate tectonics. As some of you may know, I believe there's evidence for it, but since I read, try to keep up with 50 earth science journals, I find a lot of contradictions, problems with it that aren't solved yet. And I wish they'd work on them and solve them. And I can easily believe catastrophic plate tectonics, but I see so many problems with it that is why I'm skeptical of it at this point. So there's for instance, I've done a lot of work on what's called subduction zones, trenches. There's lots of anomalies there that make one question the plate tectonics and the catastrophic plate tectonics model. But one I just published in the journal Creation maybe 3 or 4 years ago was that I don't get into this too much. It's a subject I don't really like getting into. I don't spend a lot of time on it, but I do publish a few of them now and then. And one was 4 years ago, where I discovered that there's these deep sea fans. That's right, deep sea fans that started on the North American plate and spread onto the Pacific plate during the Cenozoic. They dated the Cenozoic. And if there was motion of the Pacific plate compared to the North American plate, which is about 6 centimeters a year to the northwest for the Pacific plate, in relation to the North American plate, which includes not only North America, but Alaska and Northeast Siberia. You should have seen about 1,000 kilometers change, and you should see no consistent deep sea fans going from the North American plate to the Pacific plate during the Cenozoic. And yet you do. You have one that actually crossed from southern Alaska, went south, and it's called the Zodiac fan. It actually is a south of the Aleutian Trench, and even the fan is south, and it's a couple hundred meters thick. It's very wide. They know it came from Alaska. The paleocurrent directions and stuff indicate that, and it wouldn't be consistent. You wouldn't have seen a fan like that from Alaska if the Pacific plate was moving relative to Alaska. And then you go to northwest part of the Pacific plate, you have the Meiji fan that started the North American plate and spread onto the Pacific. And there's no disruption of that over the 1,000 kilometers it should have moved. The plate should have moved relative to each other. So I find stuff like that. And that's published. You can check it in the Journal of Creation. There's another one, the which isn't so convincing. It's the Monterey Sea fan that spread from North American plate near Monterey across the Pacific plate. And it doesn't show any north-south movement between the plates for all the Cenozoic that fan supposedly was being deposited. So I find lots of glitches. I think down the road, I'm going to spend more time looking at it. And right now, I don't spend a lot of time on it. And so 2002 was the debate I had with John Baumgartner on. It's pretty old. And so you can read it on the creation.com website. And so he believes what he believes, and I believe a little bit of what he believes, but I was a weather forecaster for 30 years, and so when there's a lot of uncertainty, I would give probabilities. Like there's a 20% chance of rain today. You've heard them. And anyway, I use probabilities for some of these things. And so I give catastrophic plate tectonics a 20% probability of being right, 80% chance of being wrong at this point. But those probabilities can change with further information. I might end up believing it one of these days, but I need to be convinced on a lot of anomalies.
Well, so many great points there, Mike. And I do remember reading that. And I'd recommend all of the articles and papers that we've kind of referenced and sourced today. I want to respect your time because we are going on 2.5 hours, and therefore maybe out of these 1,000 questions we have, maybe I'll pick out one that kind of sums up many, because there's a question here that I believe does so. And the question, Mike, is, and I believe you've written on this too. I remember reading an article on this. Are fossils as neat and organized as the evolutionists would have us believe? Or are there any out of order fossils? Mike, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, okay. Well, there's certainly a lot of out of order fossils with overthrusts, but I believe that many of these overthrusts are real. I was skeptical at one time, but I've come around to believe that most of them are real. Yeah, I run into them now and then. For instance, dinosaurs. I've run into 6 research reports of finding dinosaurs above the Cretaceous into the Paleocene, or Paleogene as the Europeans would look at it. And they've been eggs or tracks or something like that, or bones. And there's a statement by a famous dinosaur researcher that says that that we actually date the strata by the dinosaurs. You find a dinosaur, it's automatically older than 65 million years, and we don't find them above. So there's a lot of some circular reasoning there. And these other ones, they claim were reworked. They have that one where in the Paleocene, it was eroded from a Cretaceous sediment, and the fossil went with the erosional debris and was deposited in the Paleocene. So that's usually what they say. But eggs and tracks, you can't do that because they don't erode. So they just simply redate the strata and say, hey, this is not Paleocene, it's Cretaceous. So they do that. But one in the San Juan Basin in New Mexico, they found some big dinosaur bones out there that were claimed to be Paleocene, above the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary. And the guy is sticking to his guns. I haven't read anything on it, but these are big bones. You can't really rework a huge dinosaur bone from the Cretaceous up into the Paleocene. So I haven't seen any responses. I haven't seen what they say about it. It's just kind of left hanging as far as I'm concerned. They probably don't know what to do or say. But this is kind of how they do. So you're not going to find too many out of place fossils because they make them in place, a lot of them. But there is order to the geological column in the fossil order. I go along with the general geological column and a general fossil order, but I've run into enough exceptions that I'm kind of skeptical of a precise order that they claim occurred based on evolution over deep time.
Mike, in a recent debate on this channel, an atheist who was debating a Christian stated that if there were fossils found, dinosaur fossils found above the iridium layer that was caused by the Chicxulub impact, then that would disprove evolution. I've got news for that guy. Dinosaur bones or dinosaur fossils have been found above that iridium layer.
Yes,
paleontologists have reported on it.
Right. And they just explain it away by several possibilities, of which I mentioned two: reworking and just redating the strata.
Yeah, that's why it's unfalsifiable, because they always have a rescue device for whatever contradictory piece of evidence that we find. And that's why it can't be a scientific theory, because they have all these rescue devices.
That's right. Rescue device is a very good term for them.
Yeah.
Well, I'd wonder, George, if that specific individual you are talking about, if he saw that information that he said would convert him away from evolution, if he would actually convert or do what Mike said, rework and resort to circularity, because I would probably bet on the reworking, as they're so good at. So that being said, I want to respect Mike's time. We're going on 2.5 hours, and I want to thank the audience for so many great questions. I mean, we could probably ask questions all day, and Mike, I could listen to you all day. You're incredibly thorough, and your presentation was awesome. It's a must watch. It's an honor to have you on, and we're happy to have you on anytime again in the future as well. So Mike, thank you so much again for giving us your time. I also want to hand it over to you for some final thoughts and some final words.
You're welcome for the compliments, and I hope it really blesses people. In fact, that's the point of the ministry that the Lord's led me to try to answer questions. And so I've done this, and there's a lot more to go. And so that's why I keep working full time, including Saturdays. I just hope hopefully the Lord will give me good health my later years. And so I will keep on keeping on, and I hope it blesses people.
Amen, brother. Amen.
Amen. Yeah.
You will be in our prayers, of course, because you are an incredible blessing, and this really was a blessing, and so many people are profiting from it. Your answers have been incredibly helpful. George, thanks for joining me as well to help host this event that I think was so great. George, did you have some final words, brother?
I'd like to thank Michael as well, but I'd also like to apologise to him because it seems these streams just give him more ideas for more articles to write. So, sorry, Michael.
Yeah.
Never-ending projects.
I'm working on one that's going to be at least 5 parts right now. They actually discovered, or actually have measured, the amount of sediments in the ocean. And so I'm working that backwards because that sediment came from the runoff of the floodwaters, practically all of it. And you know what the amount of sediments in the ocean indicate that the amount of erosion on the continents was about 1,900 meters. 1,900 meters was eroded during the recessional stage of the flood. And it's in the ocean, various places, especially the continental shelf. And they all got this all measured all over through the ocean. It's pretty hardcore. And so I'm working that and working it backwards to say, what does it say about the late flood? First of all, a lot of huge erosion, and I've calculated 3 areas of erosion that are giving me big numbers, so it's about right. And then we got to say, well, we have about 3,000 meters left of sediment on the continents. The exact number is variable. We're getting various researchers that give us various numbers. I'm doing this with John Reed and Peter Klevberg. And so if you have 3,000 meters and add another 1,900 meters for approximately 5,000 meters at the peak of the flood, what is this saying about the early flood? You got to generate enough sediment to have 5,000 meters at the peak of the flood. Wow. Where does that come from? I mean, there's a lot of questions working it backwards. We got 5 papers already semi-outlined out, and I've done almost the first 2. So that's what I'm working on right now.
And Mike, we've done quite a few streams on erosion. I mean, the secular erosion rates suggest that the Earth's dry landscape should have eroded within 10 to 12 million years. So that's a problem for them. Even when you consider orogeny or uplift,
right?
You still can't get that figure down like 10 to 12 million years. Like that's like the landscape eroding 300 times in that life of the Earth, the deep time life of the Earth.
Right. They got a lot of problems trying to explain that. But I'm trying to explain from the flood what's there. We finally found out what's there in the oceans, and I'm trying to figure out what's there on the land, and I'm getting different numbers, but it's getting to be about 3,000 meters about, if I averaged several of them. So that the sediments where they're at, that tells us a whole lot. Huge. I think at least 5 papers are going to come out of this, and probably send them to the Creation Research Society quarterly. So your readers should subscribe to the Journal of Creation, the Creation Research Society quarterly. If they don't, they'll see all kinds of good stuff, new stuff by me and a lot of other creation scientists doing research.
And did you recently speak? It must have been a few years ago now, but on the Creation Conference, the latest one, I believe it was, Mike.
Which Creation Conference?
I think it was it 2016 or I can't quite remember what. I'm not sure if it was on the recessive stage of the flood, or I could be wrong. I've got it mixed up right now. I'd have to look it up. But yeah, I would definitely press my audience to subscribe to the Journal of Creation, where tons of good information is constantly coming out. And I think you said it last time in our presentation, Mike, where we all know we could attack evolution in deep time all day. They got so many problems.
Right.
But you are seeking to answer some of the tough questions, some
Yes,
of the
I am.
problems with the flood itself, and I really respect that, because you're coming up with so many good answers to essentially some tough questions and objections sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Ice Age after the flood, that both periods.
Right, and that kind of brings us back to the topic that we were here today, to present and discuss the post-flood ice age. The ice age being best explained through, you could say, the ripple effect of the flood itself. So I really appreciate this presentation and the time you've given to us, Mike, because I think our previous presentation was about 2.5 hours as well. So I think we've got almost 6 hours of answers and amazing information from you, Mike. So I cannot thank you enough. I know George as well is extremely excited for these. So thank you again, Mike. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you to the chat and all your questions. And God bless everybody. We'll see you tomorrow for another flood presentation with Sal Jardina. So everybody, God bless Mike, and God bless
Michael.
Yeah, you too.